A black woman walks into the marble lobby of a five-star hotel, alone without luggage, dressed in a simple navy suit. Within seconds, a white front desk manager locks eyes on her. He steps forward, lips tight, and asks if she's lost. She says nothing. He tells her check-in is for registered guests only and suggests she leave before security is called. The few guests nearby glance over. The manager's voice is calm, but it cuts. He assumes she does not belong. Assumes she cannot afford to. Assumes she is invisible. She stands still, quiet, composed, not angry, just watching. He gestures toward the door again. "You'll need to leave, ma'am." She nods once, but does not move. What no one in that lobby knows, not the manager, not the curious guests, not the staff shifting uncomfortably behind the desk, is that this hotel, every brick of it, belongs to her. She's not just a guest. She's the founder, the CEO, the owner of the entire national chain. And what happens next will change the future of that hotel forever. Before we continue, I'd love to know, where are you watching from today? Comment below. Her name is Elise Monroe, 46 years old, born in Detroit, raised on grit and grace. Her mother cleaned houses. Her father drove city buses for 31 years without ever being late. Elise studied by streetlight, worked through college, and earned her MBA from Harvard without a single loan. Her face has graced magazine covers, though she rarely smiles for camera. She believes in legacy, not applause. 15 years ago, she founded Monroe Hospitality, a luxury boutique hotel group built on three promises: excellence, warmth, and integrity. Today, her properties span across 8 states, each designed with elegance and empathy. From the reclaimed brick walls to the hand-picked staff, everything bears her touch. But the public doesn't always recognize the hands behind the brand. Elise prefers it that way. She never travels with an entourage. No announcements, no suits trailing behind her with clipboards. She walks in like anyone else, on purpose, not to test, but to witness, to see how her guests, especially those who look like her, are truly treated. This visit brought her to Charleston, South Carolina, a city wrapped in history and heat. Its beauty is undeniable, with its pastel buildings and sprawling oaks. But Elise knows better than to be fooled by charm. Charleston smiles wide but often speaks slow, especially when addressing black women. This hotel, the Wayfair, had only opened 8 months ago, one of her most ambitious projects yet. 120 rooms, rooftop jazz bar, Southern fusion restaurant led by a James Beard nominee, and beneath it all, a staff of 70, hand-trained, personally selected, or so she believed. She arrived just after noon, straight from a speaking engagement. No luggage, no assistant, just her briefcase and quiet resolve. She didn't wear a pin, the one with the company crest. She didn't need to. This was her soil. Her plan was simple: observe, take notes, book a room anonymously, then hold a private meeting with the general manager later in the week. No fanfare, just accountability. But the moment she stepped through the glass doors, she saw something she hadn't written into any business plan. The look. It wasn't loud, wasn't cruel. It was colder than that, dismissive, the kind of look a person gives when they've already decided your worth. The front desk manager, Brent, was young, polished, and rehearsed in charm, but his charm didn't reach Elise. Instead, it was like he'd stepped into a script he didn't even know he was reading from. Woman enters, doesn't fit, must be redirected. She gave her name once. He didn't write it down, just offered polite warning about unattended visitors and gestured toward the street. To him, she was out of place, and in his world, that was enough. Elise didn't argue. She simply stood there, silent, but behind the silence, something ancient stirred. Not rage, but memory. The memory of 100 doors closed for no reason, of her mother being asked to use the back entrance, of 1,000 small cuts made by men who smiled while cutting, and now one more. But Elise had learned long ago, the real answer doesn't come from shouting. It comes from staying. And what Brent didn't realize yet, what he couldn't have imagined, was that by trying to show her the door, he was walking straight into one one that would close behind him and never open again. Brent's smile tightened as Elise stayed rooted in place. The front desk gleamed behind him, untouched. The air smelled faintly of citrus and lavender, a signature scent Elise had chosen herself. Yet here she stood, being told to leave a place she built, under lights she personally approved. Brent leaned over the counter now, lowering his voice to a near whisper, like he was offering kindness. "Ma'am, this is a private property," he said. "If you're here for an event or need directions, I'd be happy to assist. But otherwise, I need you to step outside." He was calm, firm, even polite, but the way his eyes scanned her, the way they slipped past her shoulders and settled on her skin, it was clear. He didn't see her, not as someone who belonged, not as someone worth considering. A few guests passed by behind her, pulling rolling suitcases. One, a middle-aged white couple in matching straw hats, slowed as they walked through the foyer. They glanced curiously at the exchange, lips pressed into thin lines. The man whispered something to his wife, who looked Elise up and down. Then they moved on, uninterested. Elise remained motionless. Brent's jaw shifted slightly. He tapped the desk twice with his fingers, an impatient rhythm. "I'm going to call hotel security," he said finally. "They'll help you find your way out." Behind the counter, a young Latina clerk looked up from her monitor. She frowned slightly but said nothing. Brent caught her expression. "Clarissa," he snapped. "Can you please call Gerald? Now." Clarissa hesitated, then picked up the phone. Still, Elise didn't speak. She knew this moment wasn't just about her. It never had been. It was about the culture she'd worked years to mold, about whether dignity could survive behind polite walls and polished smiles, about what happens when no one thinks anyone important is watching. Brent turned back to her. "If you're here for someone," he offered, "maybe they can come meet you outside. You can't just linger in the lobby." She raised an eyebrow, only slightly. It was the only answer she gave. The elevator dinged behind them, and a woman in business attire stepped out. She caught the tension instantly, her steps slowing. Another guest waiting to check in gave Elise a quick glance, and then deliberately looked away. From across the lobby, a young black bellhop had been watching, maybe 20 years old, slender frame, crisp uniform. His name tag read Darius. He stood by the luggage rack, frozen in place, eyes flickering between Brent and Elise. He recognized her. He'd seen her face once, in a company brochure during orientation. He remembered because his aunt had cried when she read aloud that the founder of the company was a black woman. Darius had kept that detail tucked away, like a secret medal. Now, here she was, being asked to leave, and no one else seemed to notice. Brent turned toward Clarissa, clearly annoyed. "Is Gerald coming or what?" Clarissa mumbled that she had called him. Her voice was quieter now, unsure. Elise finally moved, just a fraction. She turned her body slightly toward the concierge desk, then paused. "I'll give you one more opportunity to exit, ma'am," Brent said. His tone had hardened. He looked at his watch, like he had places to be. "Otherwise, you'll be escorted off the premises." She tilted her head, calmly. Then, softly, she said her name. "Elise Monroe." Brent blinked, confused. "Okay," he said, skeptical. But he didn't register the weight behind the words. He had already dismissed them. "I don't know who you think you are," he added, quieter now, "but you can't just walk in here and act like you run the place." The words echoed, and that was when Darius moved. Slowly, cautiously, he stepped toward the back hallway, where the regional director's office sat. He didn't make eye contact with anyone. He just walked, hands at his sides. No rush, but with a purpose. Elise watched him go, then looked back at Brent, who had folded his arms now, posture firm, certain he had done the right thing. Guests continued moving in and out of the lobby, barely aware that anything important was happening. No one raised their voice. No one shouted. But the tension clung to the air like static. Brent couldn't see it, but the lobby had already begun to shift. People were watching differently now. Some with confusion, some with doubt, and one with clarity, Elise, because she had built this place with her own two hands. And now, She was being erased inside of it, not with cruelty, but with confidence. That was the danger. That was the disease. And it had just exposed itself perfectly. A soft chime echoed from above as the front doors opened again. A breeze drifted in, carrying the heat of Charleston's afternoon sun. Brent barely glanced over. His attention remained fixed on Elise, arms crossed, ready to follow through. Security hadn't arrived yet, but the moment was closing in. Clarissa, still seated behind the desk, looked pale now. Her eyes shifted from Brent to Elise, back and forth, searching for a cue, for a way out. There wasn't one. Brent stepped forward, just enough to stand slightly between Elise and the front counter. His posture was clean, authoritative. "Ma'am," he said for the third time, "I need you to leave this property." She didn't flinch, didn't blink. Her silence was not passive. It was a mirror, reflecting every word back to him, letting it land where it belonged. Then she spoke. Just once. Elise Monroe. This time, her voice carried. It wasn't loud, but it was final, like a stone dropped into still water. A silence followed, real silence. Not the polite hush of lobby conversation, but the kind that made people look up from their phones, from their cups of coffee, from themselves. Brent gave a tight, short laugh. "Okay, and I'm Oprah." Clarissa dropped her pen, and then, from the back hallway, fast footsteps. Darius emerged first, his eyes wide, chest rising and falling. Behind him, striding quickly, eyes focused, came Mr. Harlan, the regional director, early 50s, gray at the temples, usually calm. Not today. He moved through the lobby like someone chasing time. "Elise," he breathed. Not a question, a recognition. Brent turned, confused. Mr. Harlan stopped short, looked once at Brent, then back to Elise. "No one called us," Elise said softly. "I had hoped to see the truth without needing to." Mr. Harlan's face shifted instantly. Apology, realization, panic, all fighting for space. "Ma'am, I am so sorry," he said, already turning toward the front desk. "There's been a misunderstanding." "No," Elise cut in. "There has not." She gestured gently toward Brent, not even looking at him. He did exactly what he believed was acceptable. That's the problem. Brent opened his mouth, closed it, then turned to Mr. Harlan for support. She came in off the street. She wouldn't leave. She refused to say who she was. "I gave you my name." Her words, again, landed quietly. Mr. Harlan turned to Clarissa. "You knew who she was?" Clarissa hesitated. I wasn't sure, sir." Darius stood behind them now, still silent, still watching. Elise took a single step forward. "Mr. Harlan, I like Brent's employee file brought to my office within the hour." Mr. Harlan nodded once, stiffly. "Yes, ma'am." Brent's jaw moved, searching for an argument. There wasn't one left. Not in this room. Not after everything. He had humiliated the owner of the company in her own lobby, and now the door he'd been so eager to send her through was swinging shut behind him. As Elise turned to walk toward the lounge, Darius stepped aside. Their eyes met just for a second. He gave the smallest nod, respectful, proud, stunned. She returned it, just barely, because the storm had passed now, but its memory would remain in the walls. The air in the lobby shifted, as if the very building knew something had cracked open. Brent stood behind the desk now, his polished certainty crumbling by the second. The silence around him was no longer passive. It was charged. Every staff member, every guest nearby, had become a witness, and none of them could unsee what they had just seen. Mr. Harlan stepped aside to make way for Elise. He spoke into his earpiece with urgency, instructing HR to begin reviewing Brent's employment record. His voice was low, but the weight in it was unmistakable. Elise paused in front of the desk, not to gloat, not to explain. She simply asked, "How long has he worked here?" Clarissa answered without looking up. 3 months. Elise nodded. Long enough to be trained. Long enough to forget how to see. Mr. Harlan motioned Brent toward the hallway. "We'll need to speak privately." But Elise raised a hand. "No." Her tone was soft but final. He doesn't need privacy for what he gave me in public. Brent looked around now, hoping for backup, but there was none. Even Clarissa kept her eyes low. The couple in straw hats had circled back into the lobby and now stood quietly behind a potted plant, watching the scene unfold with sudden awareness. Darius stood a few feet away, spine straight, hand behind his back. Elise turned to the rest of the staff, who had gathered. Her words weren't angry. They were precise. I built this place with the belief that hospitality could feel like home, no matter who you are or what you look like. But what I saw today wasn't about misunderstanding. It was about assumption, about who gets believed and who gets removed. She turned to Brent once more. You removed me from my own house. Then she looked toward Darius. You recognize me, not just my face, but what I stand for. Darius swallowed hard, nodding. Elise turned to Mr. Harlan. Promote him. Today. Full-time concierge assistant. And ensure he's trained by our national lead. Mr. Harlan blinked. Of course. Absolutely. Brent took one final breath, shoulders rising. This wasn't about race, he muttered. I was just doing my job. Elisa's eyes met his for the first time that day. If that was your job, she said, you were in the wrong building. Mr. Harlan cleared his throat. Brent, your employment with Monroe Hospitality is terminated effective immediately. You can collect your belongings from HR. It was over. No raised voices. No drama. Just the quiet undoing of a man who had misjudged everything. As Brent walked past a bellhop, their shoulders nearly touched. Darius didn't move, didn't flinch. He just stood taller. Elise walked to the lobby then, headed for the executive lounge she'd once designed on a napkin in a Chicago cafe. And this time no one blocked her, because now they saw her, not as a woman, not even as a CEO, but as a standard. News of what happened in the Charleston lobby didn't come from a press release or a corporate statement. It came from a guest. A single 30-second video quietly uploaded to social media. No yelling, no chaos, just a woman standing tall while a manager spoke over her. In the background, a bellhop stepped away. Then, moments later, a white executive rushed in like he'd seen a ghost. The caption read, "The woman this man tried to remove, she owns the whole building." It spread fast. By the next morning, the clip had been shared by travel influencers, business pages, and even civil rights advocates. Not because Elise Monroe made a scene, but because she didn't. People were stunned by the restraint, the clarity, the power of her stillness. Commenters didn't just repost, they reflected. This is why representation matters. This is how racism hides in luxury. She never had to raise her voice, because her presence said everything. At corporate headquarters in Atlanta, executives gathered around screens, not in panic, but in reckoning. They knew Elise didn't believe in performative gestures. She would not make a video. She would not write a viral tweet. But she would act, and she already had. Brent's dismissal was immediate and permanent. There was no appeal, no quiet transfer to another property. His name was flagged in the system, barred from future employment across all Monroe properties. That was the easy part. The harder work began next. Every regional manager received a directive. Conduct surprise audits of lobby interactions. Pull footage. Review complaints. Not just loud ones, but the quiet notes that had slipped between the cracks. Elise ordered a complete re-examination of hiring protocols, especially for front-facing roles. She demanded the company reevaluate how professionalism was being taught and whom it unconsciously protected. At the Charleston Hotel, daily operations didn't stop, but they changed. Darius, now in a crisp gray vest and upgraded name tag, took over the concierge desk. He no longer moved quietly in corners. He stood behind the marble counter with authority, greeting guests with the kind of dignity he had seen modeled. When a mother and her teenage daughter checked in that afternoon, both black, he made sure to give them the warmest welcome a hotel had ever offered. Behind the scenes, training manuals were rewritten. One module in particular, based entirely on what happened in that lobby, was named the Charleston Standard. It used the incident not to shame, but to teach. Every new hire across the company would now study that day in detail, not to learn what Elise did, but to understand what Brent failed to see. Clarissa stayed on staff, not without consequence, but with reflection. She requested to join the Internal Diversity Council, not for credit, but to learn. Elise approved her request personally. Meanwhile, Mr. Harlan began sending handwritten apology notes to guests who had been in the lobby that day, not out of legal fear, but moral responsibility. Elise never mentioned Brent by name. Not in meetings, not in memos. To her, his mistake was not just personal, it was cultural. And culture, she knew, could not be corrected by punishment alone. It needed rebuilding. Quietly, Elise made changes to the company's scholarship program, too. She added 2 annual awards for front desk staff from underrepresented backgrounds, encouraging career growth from the ground up. Power, she once said in a speech, is not how far you rise, but how many you take with you. In Charleston, staff began to speak differently. Not louder, not forced, but with awareness. Eye contact changed. Greetings became warmer. Questions came slower. There was no dramatic revolution, just a slow, steady unlearning of assumptions. Darius's mother visited the hotel a week later. She stood in the lobby where her son now held the second highest guest-facing role in the building. She didn't cry. She just took his hand, squeezed it, and said, "This feels right." And somewhere upstairs, Elise sat in the corner of the executive lounge, tea in hand, reviewing quarterly reports. Her name didn't have to be on the wall. Her presence was already in the foundation. Exactly 1 month later, Elise returned to the Charleston Hotel. No press, no calendar alert, just her. She arrived on a quiet Tuesday morning, the kind of day when most hotel traffic is business travelers and early retirees. This time, she wore a soft ivory blouse and carried a leather notebook. Nothing more. No security, no assistance. Just like before. But the building knew her now. Darius was the first to see her. He didn't rush, didn't stumble. He simply stepped forward from behind the concierge desk, placed a hand over his heart, and nodded once, firm, proud. "Welcome back," he said. That was all, and it was enough. The lobby didn't fall silent this time. No stares, no tension. But something had shifted. Staff moved with awareness. Greetings were warmer, language more precise. People looked up when guests entered, not through guests. The change wasn't loud, but it lived in every gesture. The new front desk manager was a black woman named Monique Harris, mid-30s, sharp eyes, steady voice. She had been promoted from another property in Savannah, chosen not for optics, but for excellence. She walked out from the back office to greet Elise herself. Monique didn't offer overcompensated smiles or forced charm. She extended a hand. "We're honored to have you back." Elise took it. "You're running a strong ship already." Monique gestured toward the guest lounge. "We've made some adjustments. A few policies. Some language." Elise raised an eyebrow. "Tell me more." Monique explained that the staff now underwent quarterly empathy workshops, small group sessions where real scenarios were discussed, biases unpacked, and stories shared. The goal wasn't to shame, but to see. Each department had created new onboarding rituals that centered on listening, not just to supervisors, but to each other. Even the welcome script had been rewritten. "We're here to meet you, exactly as you are." Elise listened, quietly, in the break room. Staff now rotated who brewed the morning coffee. No more silent assumptions about who would do the small tasks. In housekeeping, workers were given a new title, guest experience stewards. A name shift, yes, but also a mindset shift. Change wasn't just trickling from the top. It was rising from the floor. Later, Elise gathered the team in the conference room, not for a scolding, not for a presentation. She simply sat at the table with them. One of the room attendants spoke up, a middle-aged black man with 20 years in the industry. "When you came back last time," he said, "it was like the air changed. People stood taller." Another, a young white receptionist, added, "It's not just about what happened to you. It's about what we didn't see, what we were trained not to notice." Elise nodded, absorbing it all. "This building," she said quietly, "will be known not for its chandeliers or its rooftop view. It'll be known for how it sees." They left the meeting without applause, just silent understanding. As she walked through the lobby to exit, a small girl tugged on her mother's sleeve and pointed. "Is that the hotel boss?" Her mother smiled, unsure, and nodded. Elise paused at the door. Looked back. The desk was in good hands. The bellhop stood confident. The staff no longer whispered confusion. They wore clarity like uniforms. No one had to know what had happened a month earlier. But the building remembered. And it moved differently now, because Dignity had walked through and never truly left. The story didn't end in Charleston. It traveled, in memos, in meetings, in whispered conversations between co-workers in hotel hallways across the country. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was true. Because it showed what happens when quiet power stands still and lets others reveal themselves. Brent disappeared from the industry, not as a villain, but as a lesson. His name became shorthand in training sessions, not to shame but to warn. Darius became more than a bellhop. He began mentoring new hires, teaching them what it meant to see before serving. His words carried weight, because they came from experience. When asked why he stayed in hospitality, he said, "Because dignity lives in the details." And Elise? She continued to walk into her hotels unannounced, still dressed simply, still silent, still watching. But now, across her properties, people stood taller when they saw a black woman enter. Not because she might be important, but because she always was. If this story moved you, share it. Tell someone about the power of restraint, the strength in stillness, and the value of being seen. Because change doesn't always come with noise. Sometimes it walks in quietly and leaves everything different.